February, in the mid-1980s, was where Hollywood sent movies to die. Across 1984 and 1985, 10 films crashed and burned in ways that still feel almost impressive. I've got a French New Wave legend here making his most embarrassing film. I've got the man who almost played Indiana Jones trying to prove TV stars could open movies. I've got an Oscar winner trapped in a graffiti activist drama. And one of these films returned only 1.3% of its budget, which is basically lighting $10 million on fire and walking away. Which bomb was the most catastrophic? Let's find out. Reckless was supposed to launch careers. Director James Foley making his feature debut. A script by Chris Columbus, who'd go on to write Gremlins and direct Home Alone. Stars Aidan Quinn and Daryl Hannah. MGM spent around $4 million on this teen romance, which means they needed somewhere around $10 million to break even once marketing was factored in. It made $8.3 million domestic. On paper, that looks almost okay. It's not. Here's where it gets interesting. Chris Columbus was banned from set during production. He later said on a podcast that director James Foley destroyed his material and he actually cried after the first screening. The film holds a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. 0. And it opened exactly 2 weeks before Footloose, which made $80 million and had a soundtrack everyone actually wanted to buy. You'd think a teen rebellion movie with a rock soundtrack would find an audience in 1984, but Reckless was bleak Rust Belt despair while Footloose was triumphant small-town dancing. The timing was lethal. Maxwell Caulfield turned down the lead role and later said he regretted it. James Foley turned down the chance to direct Purple Rain to make this instead. Both of them probably think about that sometimes. Foley recovered eventually. He directed Glengarry Glen Ross, but Reckless just vanished, buried under Kevin Bacon's dancing feet. Dudley Moore was at his absolute peak when Unfaithfully Yours went into production. He'd just come off Arthur, which earned him a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination. 20th Century Fox gave him somewhere between $12 and $18 million to remake a 1948 Preston Sturges comedy. Break-even was probably around $40 million once you factor in marketing. It made $19.9 million. Some sources call that a minor commercial success. It wasn't. The thing is, this project was originally developed for Peter Sellers, who passed away in 1980 before cameras could roll. Moore inherited the role, but he brought a completely different energy. Sellers would have been anarchic. Moore was bumbling and warm. Critics noticed. The original Sturges film holds 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. This remake sits at 33%. And here's the detail that really stings. Moore turned down the lead in Splash to make this. That role went to Tom Hanks instead, launched Hanks into leading man territory, and grossed $69 million. As Hanks rose, Moore began his long decline. Unfaithfully Yours was followed by Best Defense, then Santa Claus the Movie, then A String of Disasters. Barry Levinson co-wrote this screenplay before he became the guy who directed Rain Man. Moore spent time shadowing composer Bill Conti to learn actual conducting technique for the role. Everyone involved was talented. The movie just didn't work. Some remakes shouldn't exist. This is one of them. Louis Malle was one of the most respected directors alive when he made Crackers. He'd just come off Atlantic City, which earned multiple Oscar nominations. He'd made My Dinner with Andre with Wallace Shawn. Universal gave him $12 million to remake the beloved Italian comedy Big Deal on Madonna Street. It made $129,268 total. That's not a typo. The film opened in approximately 21 theaters with an opening weekend of $58,689. That's a return of roughly 1.3% on the production budget alone. No marketing, no prints and advertising, just the negative cost. 1.3%. Here's what went wrong. This project was originally developed for John Belushi, who passed away in March 1982. Donald Sutherland inherited the role, and according to critics, he never gets out of low gear. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that Malle and his accomplished cast managed to make as painfully witless a comedy as any knucklehead on the block. That's devastating coming from Canby. You'd think Sean Penn's presence would mean something. It didn't. He was fine. He moved on to Racing with the Moon and the Falcon and the Snowman without looking back. Wallace Shawn kept collaborating with Malle. Christine Baranski went on to become Christine Baranski. But Crackers itself? 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. 39 Amazon customer ratings. It's the most complete theatrical failure of the decade, proportionally speaking. Mal never really talked about it. He made Au revoir les enfants 3 years later, and everyone pretended this didn't happen. Tom Selleck was the biggest star on television when Lasseter came out. Magnum P.I. was a phenomenon. And Selleck was also the man who almost changed blockbuster history. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas offered him Indiana Jones. He read 8 pages of the script in Spielberg's office and knew it was special. CBS refused to let him out of his Magnum contract. Harrison Ford became the second choice. The rest is history. Warner Brothers gave Selleck $20 million to prove he could open a movie. Lasseter is a period thriller set in 1939 London, with Selleck as a gentleman, jewel thief blackmailed into stealing Nazi diamonds. Break-even was somewhere around $50 million. It made $17.5 million. Not even close. The marketing didn't help. The tagline was, "The Magnum Man hits the big screen with a vengeance." That screams TV cash-in, not prestige cinema. Roger Ebert actually liked the movie and said Selleck was clearly capable of making the leap from television. Audiences disagreed. Here's the pattern that emerged. Selleck could only film during a narrow window between Magnum seasons. High Road to China made $28 million, but got dismissed as an Indiana Jones knockoff. Lasseter lost money. Runaway made $6 million. It wasn't until 3 Men and a Baby in 1987 that Selleck finally had a genuine hit, and that one made $167 million. Hollywood's skepticism about TV stars was validated for years. Selleck deserved better, but the industry wasn't ready to believe in him. Heavenly Bodies started as a $900,000 Canadian TV movie. Co-writer Ron Bass later admitted he thought the whole thing was insane. His exact words, "A Flashdance ripoff? That's what this is." A blatant, shameless attempt to recreate Flashdance with aerobics instead of welding. MGM bought North American rights after seeing a 45-minute promotional reel at Cannes. They released it on 1,504 screens. Predictions suggested a $12 million opening weekend. It made $1.1 million and landed in 11th place. The total domestic gross was $1.8 million. For context, that's twice the production budget, which sounds acceptable until you remember MGM paid for prints, advertising, and the widest release a Canadian aerobics movie has ever received. The losses were substantial. You'd think arriving 2 years after Flashdance would be fine. Trends move slowly, right? Not in 1985. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said the film had all the intellectual content of an M&M. The Philadelphia Daily News called it 90 minutes of continuous klutz dancing to some truly dreadful elevator rock. Producer Robert Lantos went on to become a legitimate mogul. He produced Crash and Eastern Promises. Star Cynthia Dale became a major Canadian TV presence. The soundtrack featured Giorgio Moroder overseeing production, which is wild for something this cheap. None of it mattered. Heavenly Bodies hit Blu-ray in November 2024, which confirms somebody out there cares. But in February 1985, nobody did. Heaven Help Us has one of the most stacked unknown casts of the entire decade. Andrew McCarthy, Kevin Dillon in his film debut, Patrick Dempsey in his film debut, Mary Stuart Masterson, Stephen Jeffries, who was simultaneously preparing for Fright Night, and an uncredited Yeardley Smith, who would later become the voice of Lisa Simpson. The film was originally titled Catholic Boys, which actually tells you what you're getting. The studio changed it to Heaven Help Us because they worried the original title would alienate viewers. It made $6 million. The title change helped no one. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars and identified the exact problem. He said the sweet romance worked, but the sadistic classroom scenes were so ugly they threw the whole movie out of balance. Heaven Help Us has not found its tone. That's the verdict. A tonal mess with incredible talent trapped inside it. Andrew McCarthy later called it his favorite movie from that era and noted that approximately 12 people saw it. John Hurd played one of the brothers. He later claimed that a comment he made on set about hiring a Jewish director for a Catholic school movie cost him 2 years of work. The cast walked out of this and became famous. McCarthy defined the Brat Pack. Dempsey became McDreamy. Yeardley Smith became Lisa Simpson for 35 years and counting. Heaven Help Us deserved better. So did everyone in it. Mischief opened on February 8, 1985. The Breakfast Club opened on February 15, 1985. One of these movies redefined teen cinema. The other one is Mischief. Janet Maslin of the New York Times nailed it. If Norman Rockwell had wanted to make Porky's, he might have come up with something like Mischief. It's a 1950s set teen comedy about a shy kid who befriends a greaser and learns about romance. There's nostalgia, there's period music, there's Kelly Preston. 20th Century Fox released it. Budget figures aren't confirmed, but the domestic gross was $8.7 million. For a studio comedy, that's disappointing. You'd think the 1950s nostalgia angle would work. Happy Days was still on television. American Graffiti had proven the formula, but Mischief lacked anything distinctive. Critics called it neither terrible nor outstanding. One reviewer said it was hard to remember a week after seeing it. Here's the interesting part. The story came from a real guy named Gene Cavote from Nelsonville, Ohio. Writer Noel Black learned it through ham radio conversations with Cavote, so the material was authentic. The execution was just generic. Kelly Preston was building toward her breakthrough year. Catherine Mary Stewart had just done The Last Starfighter and Night of the Comet. Director Mel Damsky went on to direct all 8 seasons of Psych. Everyone involved went on to better things. Mischief arrived exactly 1 week before teen cinema changed forever. The timing was brutal. Bob Clark directed A Christmas Story in 1983. It's now one of the most beloved holiday films ever made. His follow-up was Turk 182, a movie about a graffiti activist played by Oscar winner Timothy Hutton. The budget was $15 million. Break-even was somewhere around $40 million. It made $3.6 million total. Here's the plot. A firefighter gets injured saving someone while off duty. The city denies his benefits. His younger brother adopts the alter ego Turk 182 and wages a guerrilla graffiti campaign against the mayor. The problem, as Roger Ebert pointed out, is that the movie requires us to believe not a single citizen can figure out that Turk 182 refers to the firefighter whose nickname is Turk and whose badge number is 182. Ebert called it an insult to the intelligence of the audience. Gene Siskel gave it 0 stars. The film was one of the first to receive a PG-13 rating, which is probably its most notable legacy. Timothy Hutton had won an Oscar for Ordinary People at age 20. He followed it with Taps alongside Sean Penn and Tom Cruise. Then came Daniel, Iceman, and Turk 182. His other 1985 release, The Falcon and the Snowman, was actually good. This one was not. Bob Clark's career never recovered. He went on to make Baby Geniuses in 1999. That tells you everything about the trajectory. Turk 182 didn't end his career, but it certainly didn't help. Kurt Russell made the mean season during an awkward stretch of his career. The Thing had flopped in 1982, crushed by E.T. Swing Shift disappointed in 1984. Big Trouble in Little China was still a year away. He was respected, but not bankable. Orion Pictures gave him somewhere between $7 and $10 million for a Miami-set thriller about a journalist who becomes the exclusive media contact for a serial killer. Break-even was around $20 million. It made $4.3 million, less than half its budget back. The timing was catastrophic. The mean season opened against Beverly Hills Cop in its 11th week and Witness with Harrison Ford. Eddie Murphy was still printing money. Harrison Ford was Harrison Ford. Kurt Russell was the guy from that horror movie that underperformed. You'd think a serial killer thriller would find an audience, but critics were mixed, and the marketing couldn't cut through. What's interesting is that retrospective reviews have been much kinder. Collider argued it presages both Seven and Zodiac. The film was ahead of its time. Russell prepared by shadowing real Miami Herald crime reporter Edna Buchanan. The crew filmed in the actual Herald newsroom between 10:30 p.m. and 6:30 a.m. Andy Garcia played a detective, and his work here turned heads in casting circles. 2 years later, he was in The Untouchables. Russell survived. Garcia thrived. The mean season just disappeared into the February wasteland. Sidney Poitier directed Fast Forward. The same Sidney Poitier who made Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, which grossed over $100 million and made him the first black director to helm a film that big. Fast Forward is a breakdancing movie about teenagers from Ohio who travel to New York to compete in a talent show. Quincy Jones executive produced the soundtrack. Columbia released it on 1,162 screens. Opening weekend was $1.6 million. Total gross was around $2.8 million. The problem is simple. Break-In came out in May 1984. Beat Street came out in June 1984. Break-In 2 Electric Boogaloo came out in December 1984. By February 1985, the trend was over. Fast Forward was a 1984 story released in 1985. And in pop culture terms, that's an eternity. Poitier auditioned over 400 candidates for the cast. The soundtrack featured Siedah Garrett, who later sang with Michael Jackson. None of it mattered. The wave had crested. Audiences had moved on to something else. Fast Forward opened the same brutal weekend as the Mean season, also competing against Beverly Hills Cop and Witness. Neither film stood a chance. Poitier's directing career never recovered either. His final film was Ghost Dad with Bill Cosby in 1990, which was a critical and commercial disaster. He went back to acting and eventually received an honorary Oscar in 2001. But Fast Forward remains a strange footnote. The last gasp of the breakdancing craze, directed by a legend, seen by almost nobody. These 10 films share a few patterns worth noting. Timing was lethal. Reckless died 2 weeks before Footloose. Mischief arrived 1 week before The Breakfast Club. Fast Forward showed up after breakdancing was already over. TV to film transitions were treacherous. Remakes of beloved originals carried impossible expectations. But here's the thing. Sean Penn, Andy Garcia, Patrick Dempsey, Kelly Preston, Kevin Dillon, Andrew McCarthy, Mary Stuart Masterson, Christine Baranski, and Yeardley Smith all appeared in these bombs on their way to major careers. The talent walked out of the wreckage. February was where Hollywood sent movies to die. Some of them deserved it. Most of the people involved didn't.